as well for following us on this project. You've been really great so far. I've really enjoyed kind of seeing how much you've engaged with it, all your lovely comments, super lovely to read. So please remember, when we get to the end, if you're enjoying the tour, like, share. Let's reach as many people as possible, and subscribe please as well. You can subscribe to our Facebook, and you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. That would really help us out. And that way you'll get notifications whenever we do one of these live streams, so you don't miss out on any of the fantastic online content that we've got coming up, but you can also check out all the ones that we've already done as well. So we've had quite a busy weekend. I hope you've been enjoying it as well. We've been everywhere, and you've enjoyed it from the comfort of your own sofa. How good is that? So we've been to Amsterdam, haven't we? We've been to Lisbon, we've been to New York, we've been to London already. I think I'm the last one of the weekend. You've already had a tour yesterday with my colleague Maria in Spanish, and then on Friday with my colleague Ben, which was the lovely Christmas Covent Garden tour. If you haven't seen it already, go and check it out as well. It's fantastic. So thanks guys for being here, for engaging as well. If you really want to help out, in the description, and my colleague's going to put a link now in the chat, you can click on there. It's super easy. It will take you straight through to my personal donation page as well, where you can leave a little donation if you enjoy the tour, if you think I've done a good job when we get to the end, kind of like, you know, how the free tour works, how we usually do it at Sandeman's. And it can be as little or as much as you like, guys. £1, €1, that's absolutely fine. In fact, that is more than fine. We really appreciate that, because that means that we can continue with this project. We can carry on bringing you these really great videos in English and in Spanish as well from all over the world. But also it means that we guides, we can get back out to work and we can carry on doing what we love. You can imagine it's been a very tough year for us. The tourism industry has taken a massive hit. We haven't really been able to do any work at all since March, so really these videos are great for us, because this is the only way that we're actually able to do any work at the moment, which of course we love to do. So thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate it as well. Now guys, this is a live tour, of course, as you know. It's also interactive, so I'm going to be opening up the floor to questions in a little while as well. Now you're watching on Facebook, you might be watching on YouTube. If you are on Facebook, you're welcome to stay there, that's absolutely fine, but there is a link, and if you click on that, go over to YouTube and you can participate in the chat as well, okay? So if you do want to ask me questions, I've got my phone here. In a few moments I'll be looking at the questions on YouTube. So like I say, if you're staying on Facebook, obviously I'm not going to go anywhere, but if you want to participate in the chat, which of course is really great, head over to YouTube. Super easy. Okay, the video is not gonna, you know, go anywhere, and we can do some questions in a little while. That can be anything that you like. If you just got any general questions about London, about what we're going to see, if you're a bit nosy and you want to know something about me, I'm not bothered, that's absolutely fine. When we get to the end of the tour, I'll ask, you'll ask, I'll open up for questions again. So I'm going to do it twice, all right? So if you've got anything you want to ask me now, get those questions in. Otherwise, things pop up during the tour, no problem. At the end, we'll do that again. So before we set off, I'm just going to introduce myself, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to see. If you don't know me already, my name is Ellie. Let me know as well if you've seen another one of my videos, and let me know if you've been to London before. Let me know if you've done a tour with Sandeman's. You might have even done a tour with me. If you have, please let me know, because I do go home and read all the comments. It would be really lovely if I've got anyone, you know, that's done a tour with me before. That'd be really cool. So I'm an art historian. I specialize in art theory, social history, philosophy. I came to London about 7 years ago or so. Now I'm not a native Londoner, you know, I'm not like my colleague Ben, I'm not a Londoner, you know, born and bred. But like most of us in the city, I'm an adopted Londoner. That's the great thing about London, is that, you know, you can call it home, and you can really feel that everyone is welcome here, and you can kind of become a Londoner as well if you've been here for a while. So I definitely feel that way. Although I was born here, but I moved over to the south of Spain when I was very little, so that's where I grew up. And I came back, like I said, about 7 years ago, just because I always wanted to move back to London. I wanted the kind of experience of living in the big city. In my field, it was very difficult to get a job in Spain. You know, we'd just been through the recession and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of wanted to try living here and all the great opportunities that London brings. And well, here I am. Obviously I liked it. I wouldn't live anywhere else at the moment. Seriously, it is a really, really great city. I've been a tour guide for about the same amount of time because I kind of started getting into it when I first arrived here, and I absolutely love it. It's a very, very rewarding job as well. Now, art history, for me, it's about obviously objects, okay, but really I like to kind of get to know the people behind those objects. You know, as humans, we like to make objects. That's the way that we express ourselves, through these artistic things that we make, how we express our feelings, our emotions, our philosophies. So I like to get to know people. That's what I like about history. So if you came on my Covent Garden tour a couple of weeks ago, that's kind of what we did, wasn't it? We kind of had a bit of a wander through the neighborhood, and we got to know the people that used to live there, what they did for a living, what they did for fun. We're going to do a similar thing today. We're going to go through another fascinating area of London, and one of the most famous streets in London, Fleet Street. And Fleet Street has a lot going on. It was once a very bohemian area of London because it was full of writers, artists, poets, journalists. And speaking of journalists, the very first printing press in the City of London was set up here on Fleet Street, and eventually this area would become synonymous with the national press. So we're going to see all of that, and of course a little bit more, as we make our way down this famous street. Now, before we set off, I will get out the chat and see if you've got anything that you'd like to ask me, and then we'll be ready to get going. If I can figure it out, live chat. There we go. Awesome. Ellie, nice to see you. Thank you, Claire. Why is Fleet Street famous? Well, I would say it's famous mainly for its association with printing, and like I said, with the national press. So that's something that we're going to see as we go along as well. A lot of the major newspaper publications used to have their headquarters, and we'll see a few of them on this very street. So sometimes you refer to the media itself as Fleet Street, even though they're no longer here, and we'll find out why as well a little bit later on. Hello from Barcelona. Hello, Javier. What's the best view in the City of London? Now, some would say the best view would be from the top of St. Paul's Cathedral, but I would say no, because from the top of St. Paul's Cathedral, you can't see St. Paul's Cathedral. So for me, the best view in the city is just across the road. There's a shopping centre called One New Exchange. It's a very normal, kind of boring looking shopping centre. You'd miss it if you didn't know it was there. But I always tell people to go in there, because all you have to do, you get in the lift and you go up, and there's a rooftop bar with the best view. It's so good. If you go in the summer as well, if you go at night, everything's lit up, and the most impressive view of the dome of St. Paul's. That's really what you want to see, which is a beautiful building. Oh, from Macedonia, awesome. Awesome to have so much content of London, Alicia says. How big is that city? Well, that kind of depends as to what part of it you mean, because you've got Greater London, which is enormous, and that includes the 32 boroughs of London, which are the different districts. It includes the city of Westminster over there, and it includes the City of London that we're going to see. Now, that city would have around 9 million inhabitants, so pretty large. But what we're going to see today, the City of London, is quite a lot smaller, and it only has around 8,000 to 9,000 inhabitants. Not a lot of people live here anymore. Okay, this is really where people work, and it measures around 2.9 square kilometres, the City of London. Hello from Luxembourg. What's your favourite Vin Diesel movie? Javier, thank you. Will you have a go at me if I don't have a favourite Vin Diesel movie? Oh no, he's in, I might get this wrong now and embarrass myself. Is he in Guardians of the Galaxy? Like, he plays the little tree man. Oh, that's really embarrassing, sorry. But anyway, if that's him, then that one, I guess. Cheers, thanks. All right, hello from Madrid. Hi, Susanna. So I think that's all the questions for now, I think. Are we ready? We ready to go? Don't worry, if you've got any more questions and comments, just go putting them in the chat, and I can answer them as we go along, or a little bit later when we get to the end of the tour. Oh, another one? All right, I'll see if there are any. Not sure if there are. Just a sec. Oh, okay. Who is the statue behind you? Lisa, don't worry. I'm going to tell you who this guy is in just a second. That's why I'm going to start here. So don't worry, hold on for that. Manuel says, best Christmas movie. Easy peasy. Christmas Carol, but the Muppet version, okay? It's my favourite, not just best Christmas movie, it's my favourite film, period, okay? It came out in 1992 and I've watched it every year since. I watch it every Christmas. Usually I watch it on my birthday because my birthday is tomorrow, so my birthday is very Christmassy. So usually it's my birthday when I choose to watch that. So that is what I'll be doing tomorrow. I'll be sat there with a mulled wine. I'll be watching Michael Caine and all the Muppets, basically. So yeah, easy. Right, are we ready to go now? Awesome, fantastic. Oh, just one more. Susanna says, have all the buses in London, have they got 2 floors, the double decker? Not all of them, Susanna. Most of the ones that you'll see here do, but if you've got like a smaller bus, you know, if you're kind of out in a borough that's a little bit further out from the centre, some of those smaller buses that have shorter routes and things, you might find just a single decker bus. It's possible as well, but most of the ones in the centre have the 2 floors. Yeah, double decker buses, we call them. All right, let's get cracking, let's get started. So we're here almost on Fleet Street, not quite. So Fleet Street actually is a massive street, obviously, but it's kind of divided into 3 bits, so it changes its name 3 times. Technically, you could say that it starts in Trafalgar Square, which is kind of a little bit behind me. So next time you come to London, if you're in Trafalgar Square and you want to go to St. Paul's Cathedral, it's really easy. All you have to do is walk in a straight line for about half an hour and you'll get there. Right, that's kind of what we're going to do today. So we're still on what we call the Strand. We're at the end of the Strand. It then turns into Fleet Street, and then at the final bit it turns into Ludgate Hill, and that would be where we would enter through the ancient city walls. I'm going to show you where that would have been a little bit later, and then we make our way up to St. Paul's Cathedral. So that's kind of going to be our route today. Now, the Strand connected 2 very important areas of the city, so it's a very strategic street. It connects the city of Westminster to the city of London, so the royal city to the money and the power, which is why the street behind me, that was the best place for men of power to build their great big fancy mansions. So noblemen, courtiers, clergy, they'd all have their great big houses on the Strand because they were right in the middle of where they needed to be, right? So it was really a very fancy street. Fleet Street, a little bit different. Now, this has been here since Roman times, so this would have been the street that would lead us into the original city, which was the city of Londinium, what we call today the city of London. Fleet Street was a bit different because I used the word bohemian before. What I really mean though, the rents were kind of a bit cheaper here because it wasn't the prettiest or the fanciest place to live. It wasn't quite like the Strand. Now imagine, it's kind of not too busy today because obviously of the times and it's the city, but just imagine back in the day, the muddy streets, packed with traffic, horses and carts, taverns, coffee houses, markets, shops, stalls, because of course it was like the main artery of the city, so it was really hustling and bustling, but like I said, it wasn't, you know, super posh or super fancy or anything like that. So the cheaper rents are going to attract the artists, the poets, the writers. So you had poets like John Milton, William Wordsworth living here. You had artists like William Hogarth, Samuel Pepys, the diarist, was born here. Charles Dickens was always hanging around here. Arthur Conan Doyle liked to hang around here as well. I'm going to show you where they did hang out because it's full of taverns and coffee houses, like I say. So that's why I said it's sort of a bit more of a kind of bohemian area. It's kind of a very early example, I suppose, of what you might call gentrification. Of course, no one knew about that back then, but this is something that happens a lot in London, of course. The rents are cheap in a sort of lower class area. The creative people come in, they make the area cool, and the rents go up, and then it's kind of unaffordable. So it'd be like Soho and more recently Shoreditch in the East End. Now, Susanna was asking, who's the man behind me? Well, this is a man who absolutely loved to hang out on Fleet Street as well. This is Samuel Johnson, aka Dr. Johnson. Now, do you know who Dr. Johnson is? Have you ever heard of him? When I come through here, when I'm doing in-person tours, I always ask that question just out of curiosity, because in the UK, this man is quite famous, but I would say 99.9% of the times when I ask that question and the people are not British, they haven't heard of Dr. Johnson. So anyway, have a guess. Let me know in the comments if you do know who he was. He's holding a book, right? So that gives us a little clue. Obviously, he's a man of words. He's probably an author. He's probably written a book. And in that we would be correct. He's holding the book that he's most famous for. I can give you another clue. If I tell you that although you might have never heard of this man, you've all read his book at some point. But you won't have read it from back to front, you won't have read it all, you won't have read it in order, you definitely will have read it if English is not your first language. So Samuel Johnson is the author of the first English dictionary that he completes here in his house on Fleet Street in the 18th century. Now, I love Dr. Johnson. He's a great character, very larger than life sort of character. And kind of like me, he's an adopted Londoner. So he's not from London, but he moved into Fleet Street. He loved it so much that he stayed for the rest of his life. And in his writings, he says a lot of things that he loves about London, but he's also very quotable because he does have a very famous quote that you might have heard of. So one day he was going on about how brilliant London was again, and someone says, oh, goodness sake, Johnson, do you never get sick of London? And he said, no, because when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. So what he's saying is, you'd have to be an idiot, okay, to be bored in London, because there's always something to do, and it's very much the case today. So let's have a look over here, because something that Sam liked to do was to frequent the coffee houses. Now, if you did the tour with me in Covent Garden, if not, it's still there, you can check it out. I talked a little bit about coffee houses, and I told you that they were a staple of London life, in particular the 17th and the 18th century. And I told you as well that these were not just places where you'd go to have a cup of coffee, sort of socialise, meet your friends, but also you could have debates there. They were literary hubs, areas of political debate. So Samuel Johnson, that's something that he loved, because of course he was a man of words, so what better thing to do than go and have a war of words, have a great interesting juicy debate with his mates in the coffee house. So Fleet Street was absolutely full of them. In 1700 there were about 25 coffee shops just on Fleet Street alone, because we drank coffee back then. That was the brew of choice. You might be thinking coffee though, but it's Britain. What about tea? Because we're quite famous tea drinkers. It's a stereotype, but it's also a stereotype that's true. People absolutely love tea here. In fact, when you think of Britain and you think of London, you think, I'm going on holiday there, I'll take a souvenir back. What's the sort of most British product you could think of, even though tea is not a British product, but it springs to mind, right? It's tea. Are you a tea drinker or a coffee drinker, right? The great debate. Let me know in the comments, because coffee's really had a bit of a comeback in recent years. In London, we love coffee, because we're always on the go, but we drink a lot of tea as well. Me, myself, I'm both. I drink a lot of both, but if you put a gun to my head and said for the rest of your life, so it's tea or coffee, I would go for tea because it is my first drink of the day. So I don't think I could do very well without it. But what about you? Let me know. So yeah, full of coffee houses. You've got to stand out, okay, from the competition. And one man who tries to do that in 1706, a young man called Tom, he thought, well, I'm going to set up my own coffee shop, my own coffee house. I'll call it Tom's Coffee House. Now, Tom had a little bit of dealings with the East India Company, so he learned a thing or two about tea. Now, the reason that we drank coffee and not tea was because tea was so heavily taxed, it was so expensive, only the wealthy could afford it. I'm going to give you an idea of how expensive it was. So it's coming from China, it's not cheapened until it's produced in India, that's not till the 19th century. So it's coming in from China from the 17th century. Gunpowder green tea, about 100 grams of that would cost you £160. Okay, so no matter how much you like tea, it's not really worth it. But Tom thinks, oh, I can do something here. This tea really has potential. I'm going to make it work. So from Tom's Coffee House, he sets up a little shop, the Golden Lion, and he starts selling tea. Now, his clients are wealthy aristocrats, but they're mainly ladies, and they're queuing up outside. They're taking the tea, they're taking it home, and they're starting these traditions of having tea parties, afternoon tea. All of that comes from there. Now, Tom is very successful. So successful, you all know him well. Take a look behind me. His name was Thomas Twining. Now maybe we can get a little bit of a closer look at Twining's tea shop. Now this is the original, okay? So opened in 1706 as Tom's Coffee House, then a shop was set up in the back, the Golden Lion, and today this is still their flagship store. It's tiny, it's very, very narrow, it's very cute, it's well worth a visit next time you come to London. What a great place to get a souvenir. You can see there's the royal crest there. Queen Victoria was the first to kind of make Twinings the official providers of tea for the royal family. You've got the Golden Lion on top, which was the name of the shop, and then you've got the two Chinese gentlemen either side to remind us of course, the origin of tea came from China. Now, if you swing back to me, Jericho, you can see the beautiful building that is behind me, the Royal Courts of Justice. Spectacular buildings. So these are home to the High Court and the Court of Appeals. They're the most senior courts in England and Wales. But this is the civil court, not the criminal court. The criminal court has a nickname. It's called the Old Bailey, but that's kind of further up the road. Now, these courts once used to be in Westminster Hall, but in the 19th century they decided to build a proper building just for the courts, and here it is. So it was opened in 1882 by Queen Victoria. They're absolutely massive. Now, I don't know how well you're going to be getting it, or if you're getting an idea of how big they are. Even if you're standing here, you think, oh yeah, they're pretty big, but you don't really get a good idea unless you're looking from above. So if you Google later, an aerial view of the Royal Courts of Justice in the City of London, you can see that they're enormous. This is one of the largest courts, we'll cross the road here, one of the largest courts in Europe. It's got about 1,000 rooms. And I think you'll agree, also one of the prettiest. The building, I think, is absolutely spectacular. So this type of architecture is known as neo-Gothic or Gothic revival. So in the Victorian period, it was quite popular, kind of a bit more of an eclectic style that sort of was a big contrast to the very symmetrical or, kind of rational neoclassical. Very pretty as well, and we've got lots of examples of that throughout the city, but I really like this style as well. So we're not actually in the City of London yet, because we're still on the Strand, but we're making our way now to the beginning of Fleet Street. So we're going to pass an area. Sorry guys. Everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame. So we're getting to an area called Temple Bar. Now, Temple Bar, basically where you see that column right in the middle of the road, that would be the entrance. This is our first entry into the City of London. However, this would not be where we would find the city walls. So I'll show you where we would have found the city walls a little bit later on. But what happened, of course, the jurisdiction of the city grows throughout the centuries, and so do the borders. So as it goes beyond the walls, we need areas to kind of show us where we're coming in, and these were known as bars. So this is the one for the area of Temple, okay, Temple Bar. So in the Middle Ages, as we're getting up to the crossing here, what we would have found was basically a chain going across the road, and here we'd have to get our purses out, ladies and gents, right, because we'd be finding a toll. This was pretty common. If we were merchants, we might be paying on whatever goods we'd come to sell. In medieval fortified cities, though, you'd often pay a toll just anyway for the upkeep of the roads or the defense of the cities. But don't worry, all right, this one is on me. You put your purses away. And as we go past the column, you can see it's got a dragon on top. So this is a mythical creature that's the symbol of the City of London. And now this tells us that we are officially entering the jurisdiction of the city. There used to be a lovely archway across here that was designed by architect Christopher Wren. Unfortunately, they removed it in the 19th century because the traffic just couldn't get through. But don't worry, because we will see it. They actually moved it. It's now by St. Paul's Cathedral, so when we get to the end, we'll have a look at that. And they just put this column here to kind of mark where Temple Bar used to be. Oh, one thing that I wanted to mention as well when I was sort of doing the questions is we we did get quite a few questions in other videos regarding face coverings and things like that. So I just thought I'd kind of clear that up. Although we're in the city at the moment, and as you can see, it's pretty deserted. It's extremely quiet. That's not just because of COVID. On a Sunday, there's never anybody here because, like I said, not many people actually live here. So when there's no work, obviously the offices are closed, there's rarely anyone here. But just so you know, it's not required in the UK to wear a face mask if you're out in the open. So if you're out wandering about the street, you can wear one if you like, but it's not compulsory. It is compulsory to wear them indoors if you're going in shop, if you're going on public transport, etc. Then yes, but out here in the street, no. You also don't have to wear them if you are exempt for any medical reason or something like that. I want to show you a building just here. So this one right here, Jericho. And I want to show it to you because it's actually really rare. So this is a timber building. It's a 17th century timber building. It predates the Great Fire of London, 1666. So the site of this building was actually quite a lot older, but this particular building was rebuilt in 1610. Now, a building that predates the fire, that survived the Great Fire of London, is very, very rare indeed, especially in the city, because the Great Fire of London did most damage here. It pretty much, ravaged inside of the city walls. So isn't it spectacular to see? I absolutely love it. And it just gives you an idea of what the street, would have looked like, which would have been absolutely incredible to see. This is number 17 Fleet Street. It's known as the Prince's Room. The top floor would have been the Prince's Room, as this used to be a tavern called the Prince's Arms. It was named after Prince of Wales, son of James I. He died quite young when he was invested as Prince of Wales. This pub apparently was named after him. So Samuel Pepys, I mentioned, the famous London diarist, he was born just up the road, and he kind of writes about getting drunk in here as well, pretty much in every single pub. We're going to have a look at another one as well, really, really similar. So if you go again across the road, you can see, can you make it out? It's very, very narrow, so quirky. Super narrow, this little tavern, but you can see that it's a very similar style to the Prince's Arms. However, this is an imitation, okay? It's just a copy. The site apparently dates back to the 1500s, but it's actually where we're standing. It was on this side of the road, and in the 1880s they moved it over there, but it's not even as old as that because it burnt down and it had to be rebuilt in the 90s. So it's a very good imitation, and once again just gives us an idea of what the street would have looked like. Again, Samuel Pepys was in here, obviously. Charles Dickens as well, and Alfred Lord Tennyson used to drink in this particular tavern. So we talked about the the artists living here, the poets, the writers, etc. Cross the road just when we can, being careful, there's not really much traffic about. But I also mentioned journalists as well. So this was a great place for journalists to be, because we've already said there's loads of taverns. We're also at a very critical point. We're between the city of Westminster, the city of London. I mentioned all those important people kind of living here, going to and from Westminster and the city. So what a great place to hang out and eavesdrop, right? Go into the taverns, listen to what they're saying, get all the juicy stories, all the juicy gossip, especially if they've kind of had a few too many, they might let something slip, that they shouldn't. But eventually, it's not just those journalists that are the ones kind of living here and drinking here. It's the newspaper men themselves. The first newspaper in the city of London, that was the Daily Courant, was back in 1702. But then by the 19th century, it's actually the newspapers have set up shop here. So this becomes home of the national press. And a very good example of that is this building just here on the other side of the road. We'll wait for the bus to come by. So this one here. Can we get it, Jericho? Where it says the Sunday Post, you see? So this building still belongs today to a company called D.C. Thomson. They're a publishing company from Dundee in Scotland. That's where they first opened shop in the 19th century, and then very early 20th century they opened their offices here. All those publications, Sunday Post, People's Friends, People's Journal, Dundee Courier, they all belong to the same company, to D.C. Thomson. They're also really famous for 2 comics. Now again, I don't know if you're not from the UK if you'll be familiar with these comics. They're post-war comics known as the Beano and the Dandy. The most famous character of the Beano was the very rebellious Dennis the Menace, and his dog Nasha. He was always getting up to no good. He was a particular hero of mine growing up. He was always pranking like all the adults. And then the Dandy, you had Desperate Dan, which I liked as well, sort of cowboy kind of western comic, was really cool. Now the last 2 journalists left here in 2016, and that marked the end of an era for Fleet Street, because they didn't only leave this office, they were the last 2 journalists on the whole of the street. And then this was no longer home to the media, even though, like I said, it's still kind of synonymous, Fleet Street, with media today. But why that is, I'll tell you a little bit later. Now this building is 186 Fleet Street. Do you recognise the number? It's a bit of an obscure Easter egg. You'd have to be a super fan, I think, to know 186 Fleet Street is the home, or was the home, of Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, okay? So, Sweeney Todd is not real, okay? He's a fictional character, but you might have seen one of the many adaptations. There's stage adaptations, there's musicals, there's movies. You might have seen the Tim Burton movie with Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter, because that's the most recent one. If you saw that and thought, brilliant, is this like based on a true story? No, sorry to disappoint you, okay? It's entirely fictional. But Sweeney Todd is a villainous character that was at the centre of a Victorian serial called The String of Pearls. Now this type of serial was known as a penny dreadful. It was a real cheap type of literature that came out every week. It was mass produced, so it was the first kind of example of pop culture, really, because it was aimed at young men, young working class men even, because literacy in the Victorian era was kind of on the rise. So these were really popular. They were very sensational as well. So the themes would be horror, crime, the supernatural. Successor of the penny dreadful, pulp fiction, which were the very cheap sort of magazines, mass-produced magazines. Victorian era, they were really popular all the way through to the 1950s, and they're really popular in the US as well. But you probably know Pulp Fiction, obviously, for Quentin Tarantino movie, which is named after that very cheap type of literature. So is there any truth in a serial killer? Hello, well done. It is on YouTube. Check it out. It's on YouTube. No, YouTube. Get on there. Yeah. I know, I'm famous now, aren't I? So, Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, a serial killer, chops up the victims, gets his lover, Mrs. Lovett, to shove them in a pie, sell the pies. Any truth in that? Some would think so. So there are kind of mentions of people putting things in pies that they shouldn't do. Charles Dickens has a few. So in the Pickwick Papers, one of the characters mentions a pie man that puts cats into his pies and passes them off as like more expensive meats like veal or beef. Now in Victorian London, that doesn't sound too implausible, no? Kind of, well, very cheap sort of thing, shoving it in a pie. But a human? Well, in Martin Chuzzlewit, another Dickens work, which was published before The String of Pearls, there's a character called Tom Pinch that talks about cannibalistic pastry, and he talks about hearing rumours of pie men putting people into pies. So, just rumours? Well, it's a very famous urban legend, but we'll never know, I suppose. So we talked about the journalists kind of coming to have a drink, hard drinking newspapermen. So this street was flooded with pubs. There was literally one every couple of meters. Still is really today. Even today, Fleet Street is probably one of the streets with the highest number of pubs. And speaking of which, my favourite is just behind me on the other side of the road, the Olde Cheshire Cheese. It's a fantastic pub. It's one of my favourites, not just in the area, it's one of my favourites in London, and I always recommend it. It didn't survive the fire, but it was rebuilt in 1667, so not too bad. And if you go inside, it's fantastic. You've got original wooden beams, wood panelling, fireplace, and lots of famous drinkers here as well. So Samuel Johnson used to live right behind the pub, literally 2 minutes. You can visit his house as well. It's a museum, so he probably drank here. Mark Twain, when he was staying in London, again, Charles Dickens, again, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Arthur Conan Doyle, even Teddy Roosevelt as well was a visitor here when he came to London. When you go inside, you can see the list of all the people that have been inside the pub and add yourself to the list, right? I always recommend it. It's so nice, and it's very cheap as well. I think when you come to London, eating and drinking out can be quite expensive, so a cheap pint, right, recommendation, I feel is always welcome, no? So the Olde Cheshire Cheese, remember it next time you come. Fantastic building behind me as well. This used to be the headquarters of the Telegraph. You're probably a bit more familiar with that newspaper. And this is a beautiful example of Art Deco. So Art Deco, Art Décoratif, appeared in Paris, in France, before World War I. This was a style that spread across art, architecture, design. So the idea was to mix very modern styles with like fine crafts, good materials. I really like Art Deco because it's very eclectic. It's a big mishmash. I really like that. A bit OTT, very decorative. So if you have a look as well, you can see the columns there, and you've got these Egyptian motifs on this one. And I mean, that clock is just fantastic. Much better in the daytime when you can see all the colours, but I think you can still pick it up. Really, really nice. The Telegraph's not here anymore though, so it moved in the 80s, and this building now belongs to Goldman Sachs. So you've probably heard of them, the investment firm. And in fact, Fleet Street now, that the newspapers are no longer here, it's mainly investment firms and banks as well, especially as you go further east, you kind of start seeing all the banking. And as I said, this is the financial district. So usually when someone says they work in the city, someone's a city worker, doesn't mean they do anything. It kind of means, no, that, you know, they're a banker or they're into finance or something. We've got another one coming up on the other side as well. Oh, actually, this one's just very pretty, just for a little look. Because it's a nice example of what the area would have looked like in the 50s. Very cool. This is Mersey House. Mersey because it was home to the Liverpool Post and the Liverpool Echo. But what I want you to have a look is the next building along. So you can see this very modern one, this glass one here. This is a bit of a taste divider, would you say? Some people think it looks really sort of slick and sexy and modern, and other people think it's just hideous. So this was the headquarters of the Daily Express. Like the Telegraph building, it also now belongs to Goldman Sachs. I don't know, what do you think about it? It's also Art Deco, by the way. It's just a different type of Art Deco. It's a little bit later, from the 30s. It's called Streamlined Modern. So Streamlined takes more inspiration from aerodynamic design, technological advancements, and that sort of thing. Now, I don't dislike it. I just think it's all right. I don't know, what do you think? I won't be offended, you know, I didn't design it. I think it's the colour that kind of makes it a bit sort of very corporate. Now have another look. I don't know. It feels just a bit dark and bland. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Not that I don't like modern architecture, you know, there's a lot of things that I like, but I think it's maybe the colour. I'm always interested to hear what you guys think. So, we got time, do you think, to stop here in a bit? So just very quickly, I mentioned that the Great Fire of London 1666 kind of ravaged, you know, all the city, so lots of buildings had to be rebuilt, churches as well. Christopher Wren, who's the author of St. Paul's Cathedral that we're going to see, you're going to start to see it in just a few moments. He's also the author of this church. He rebuilds over 60 of the churches that burnt down, and this one is St. Bride's. So it's a very, very old site. They discovered, it was also quite badly damaged in World War II, and when they were rebuilding it, they discovered that there are Roman ruins in the basement here as well, which are quite interesting. And it's known as the Journalist Church, obviously because of its association with the press. Just have a look at the steeple though there, and I wonder if it reminds you of anything. Does it remind you of anything? I always give as a clue sort of something that you might eat, and then usually people get it. They say it reminds them of a tiered wedding cake. And I'll tell you the story as we walk along towards Ludgate Circus. So the story goes that the inspiration for sort of traditional tiered wedding cake that we have today comes from Wren's design on St. Bride's. So there was a baker called William Rich, and apparently he had an apprentice who fell in love with his daughter. And when he finished his apprenticeship, he was like a baker in his own right. The baker thought, oh, well, now he's sort of good enough for my daughter. So they got married, and the apprentice, he's thinking, well, some stories say it was Rich himself, others that it was the apprentice, that is thinking of making a wedding cake, but he's not really sure what to do. He's not feeling very inspired. So he goes for a wander around the neighborhood, and lo and behold, he sees the steeple of St. Bride's, and he thinks, right, that's it. That's my cake. And he recreates St. Bride's in a wedding cake, thus giving us the tiered wedding cake. Is the story true? I have no idea, but it's a really nice story to tell. Just have a look here at Mr. Punch up there. So this is the Punch Tavern. Now, you might remember, if you did come to Covent Garden with me, that I told you about Punch and Judy. Now, this isn't named after Punch and Judy itself, or even Mr. Punch. It's named after the magazine Punch, because the offices were really close by. Oh, by the way, if you don't remember what Punch and Judy was, or you don't know, basically it's a type of puppet show that first appeared here in the 17th century. And it's Mr. Punch and his wife Judy. It's a very sort of slapstick kind of humour. So Punch magazine used Mr. Punch as their mascot, and he always appeared on the front cover, kind of getting up to no good. But Punch magazine is a really fascinating publication. It's a satirical magazine. It appeared in 1841. And it was really, really quite clever. So it was well known for its illustrations. It was also well known for its articles, quite radical articles, but the illustrations were its success. The cartoons. In fact, they say that Punch actually coins the term cartoon in reference to like a humorous type of illustration. The reason that they were successful was they were a little bit different in the way that they did things, in the style. Remember, Fleet Street is dog eat dog, okay? I think we can cross now, should we be cheeky? Yeah. Now, Fleet Street is dog eat dog, right? So everyone's attacking each other. There's no ethical or like moral responsibility of the press or anything like that. Anything goes, right? Anything to sell a story, to spin a story. There are bribes, corruption, okay? That's the kind of environment here in Fleet Street. Writers, hacks, you know, will just sell their story to the highest bidder. Oh, by the way, a hack is like a pen for hire type of journalist. So imagine them like a mercenary, you know, kind of journalist. And they would just sell the story to whoever paid the most. You still use the term hack today as in a sort of derogatory way, really. So that's the kind of, you know, environment of Fleet Street. So Punch was a little bit different because they weren't really offensive, they weren't too harsh, they weren't too vulgar. It was a very sophisticated type of satire, and that meant that they were able to kind of appeal to everyone, so really, really popular as well. It doesn't exist anymore. Kind of peaked in the Victorian era, then again kind of post-war, 2002, it closed down. I just want to show you what we've just walked through. We've just crossed Ludgate Circus and we're now come onto Ludgate Hill. So basically what we've done is entered the old city walls. You can't see them because they're not here anymore, but this is where they would have been. Ludgate was one of the great entrances into the city. So when you come to London and you notice that, oh, this tube station is something gate, you know, like Bishopsgate, Moorgate, Aldersgate, Cripplegate, Ludgate, then that means that this was simply one of the entrances, one of the great entrances in through the city wall. So we've now entered the real city, okay, the original city, what we call the square mile, because that's what it measured. Also, that street that's crossing behind me, that would have been the River Fleet. Now on the Strand, the fancy mansions, they backed out onto the Thames, you know, the rooms had a river view, but here the Fleet was not a really nice view, or rather not a very nice smell. It was basically used as the city's rubbish dump, okay, so people threw everything into the river. If you came up and you're coming up through Ludgate, there were, you know, animal carcasses, rotting meat, excrement, both human and animal, tanneries as well. If you've ever been to a tannery, like you might have been on holiday to Morocco where they have them, for example, you know what I mean, right? The smell is horrific. So thankfully for everyone's noses, they put the River Fleet underground in the 1700s, so it kind of technically is still where we just crossed, but it's underground. So you come to London, you think we only have the River Thames, but no, we've actually got quite a few rivers, just that they're all subterranean today, but there are still points in the city where you can see them as well. So we're coming up to St. Paul's as well, we're making our way up there. So just to say as well, we're kind of coming to the end of the tour very shortly as well, so if you've got any more questions or things have popped up, again, when we get to the end, don't worry, I'm going to have another look at the comments as well and just answer as many as I can. Now, I've told you that the newspapers used to be here. I've mentioned that they're no longer here, but I didn't tell you why. Where did they go? Why did they leave Fleet Street? Well, the answer basically comes down to profits. It just wasn't profitable for them to be here anymore. Printing isn't really computerized, you know, mechanized until quite late, the 1980s. So before that, it's very manual. It's done by print workers. The method is quite manual, using hot metal printing methods. And all here on Fleet Street, these print workers belong to really powerful unions. Some people thought these unions probably were a bit too powerful. For example, Prime Minister of the time, Margaret Thatcher, and Rupert Murdoch. I don't know if you know Rupert Murdoch, but basically, to cut a long story short, he is the owner of a massive publishing company called News International, and they own a lot of other publications like the Times, the Sunday Times, the Sun. So in 1986, Rupert Murdoch thinks, it's not really profitable having these guys here anymore. We've got to move out, we've got to computerize this, we've got to use this new technology. And what they did was they moved all the printing to the Docklands in the east, and they fired all the print workers. That's thousands of staff. So you can imagine that they weren't happy, and there were a lot of protests, strikes that went on for a year. This was known as the Wapping Dispute, because it was Wapping, just nip down here if we can, it was Wapping in the Docklands where they moved the printers to. They were unsuccessful, obviously, because, you know, what was done, and what happened was all the other newspapers thought, brilliant idea, Rupert, off we go. And that was the end of Fleet Street. So Reuters were the last big company to leave. They didn't go till 2008 or so. And then you saw we had those last two journalists in 2016. Wow, I didn't expect it to be so dark in here. I thought there'd be a bit of light. So we'll kind of come through briefly. This is the Stationers' Company. Basically, this is the Guild of Publishers. But as it's so dark, I'll kind of tell you about them as we walk. I don't even know if you can see this, but just there's a plaque here. But we can walk to where it's lighter and I'll tell you about it. Because basically what I wanted to do was to bring you where it all began, okay, this area. When I say where it all began, printing, because I've told you how it ended, But why did they come here in the first place? I mean, if we're going where it really all began, we can say, well, we can go to China, can't we, to movable type using wooden blocks. But it's first mechanized in Europe. Johannes Gutenberg invents the printing press, the Gutenberg press, in 1450. William Caxton, he brings it over here in 1476, and he sets up a printing press inside of Westminster Abbey. Now, he had an associate, another German man, and that's who that plaque in the Stationer's Court is dedicated to. He's called Winken de Voorde. I hope I've said that right. I asked my husband for some help with that pronunciation. I want to do it properly. So Winken de Voorde, he takes Caxton's press, he brings it to the city, and he starts improving it. So he sets up basically where we just were, where it was very dark. That was the site of the very first printing press, sort of around 1500 in the city of London. Now, when I say he improves it, he starts to commercialize basically books. So what he wants to do is he wants to mass produce them as much as you can, you know, in 1500, and make them cheap. So he had religious books, obviously, poetry, romantic novels, and loads of illustrations as well. And where we're going to finish the tour in just a second is St. Paul's churchyard, and that's where he sets up his first bookstall as well, and thus begins the long association of Fleet Street with printing and the national press. I told you that we were going to see Temple Bar, okay? And here it is. So this is Christopher Wren's Temple Bar that would have gone where we saw the dragon as we entered into the city of London. They just moved it here because it's out of the way and we can enjoy it a little bit better. So this was commissioned by Charles II, bit of a celebration of the restoration of the monarchy and the Stuart dynasty. So we've got Nan and Grandad here, James and Anne here. Let's go through and we'll have a look on the other side as well. Although beautiful, when it was at Temple Bar where we passed through, it was a little bit gruesome because it was decorated with heads on spikes of traitors, much like London Bridge. This was also used for the same purpose. And then you can just have a little last look on the other side before we finish, because there you've got the other two statues, Charlie, little Charlie, and Dad Charles I. It's really lovely. So we've almost finished, folks, because we're here. We've reached our destination and we're here at St. Paul's churchyard. Sorry if it went on a bit too long, I feel, today, but Fleet Street, it's just got, you saw, it's got so much on it and so much more that I haven't really had time to talk about as well. So really, that's why I recommend that, you know, next time you're in town, you come and check it out. So we're here in the sort of shadow of the great St. Paul's Cathedral, but I'm really going to talk about the churchyard here, because this is, like I said, this is where we start that first bookstall. De Voorde sets up his bookstall, others follow suit. So this soon becomes what was known as really the bookshop of London. I would argue that this was the centre of the book trade for the whole of England, okay? So you could come here, you could buy whatever was allowed and whatever wasn't allowed as well, because surrounding here you'd have those clandestine printers where you could get your hands on, you know, maybe a banned book or maybe a radical pamphlet or something like that. But any books that were here kind of out in the open, they had to be approved by, you know, those guys that we saw in that court, the stationers company. So they're, like I said, a sort of guild, the Printers Guild. They're sort of boo, you know, the bad guys for quite a while, because basically they can censor anything, they can seize books that they think are offensive to the state or offensive to the church or something like that. But they come up with the first idea of copyright. And if you're a member of the guild, your book has got to be approved, it goes on the register, and great. And that also means that no one else has the right to copy, the origin of copyright. Bit different though back then, because they were the Printers Guild, not the authors. So the copyright was for the person that printed the book. I know that sounds weird, not the person that wrote the book. That wouldn't come till later. 1710 they start to change the laws, and then those guys kind of lose their monopoly. Even theatre plays, The register, though, provides us with a fantastic document because, of course, it's got all the books that were printed that had to be approved. So Shakespeare had to have all his plays approved on the register before they could be sold here. And here you could come and, you know, grab yourself a copy of Macbeth here from St. Paul's Churchyard. So, guys, that's all that we've got time for today. We'll be revisiting St. Paul's Cathedral on other tours as well. My colleague Ben, Big Ben, he's got a really good tour that is already, if you check out the Facebook page, where he goes to the other side of the city, and he's got a great bit about St. Paul's Cathedral as well. Otherwise, you know, we'll be back soon enough. So before we do go, I will come check out if you've asked me any other questions before we say our goodbyes. Let's have a look. Ellie, oh, here's one for you, Jericho. Ellie and the great cameraman, camera woman. Thank you, Jericho. She is amazing, fantastic. Oh wow, there's lots of things. Okay, lots of things. Very elegant street. Oh, Claire says, can you see Roman ruins in the city? Oh, you sure can, Claire. So there are a few different places. I mean, for such an important Roman city, we don't have, you know, a great deal to show for it. But yeah, you can. So the Museum of London has lots of things on show as well. Underneath St. Bride's, I mentioned there are Roman ruins. Underneath Billingsgate as well has Roman ruins underneath. The Guildhall in the City of London, I think, has bits of an amphitheatre. But really, if you're sort of out and about, the easiest one would be the Tower of London. If you go to the Tower, all around that area, you've got bits of the old city wall, the Roman wall, and then the medieval wall. Tower Hill Station is the best place to see that. Really, really good. Lisa says, did the Blitz hit any of Fleet Street? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, for example, St. Bride's itself, St. Paul's Cathedral, very badly damaged in the Blitz. Again, Ben kind of talks a bit about that on his tour, but that was known as the second Great Fire of London. You can actually Google images, if you like, as well after this, of St. Paul's on fire during the Blitz. It's pretty, you know, horrific, but spectacular, you know. Oh, Lisa says, Hack is a taxi driver over here. Well, yeah, because probably the word comes from Hackney, and taxis are also called Hackney cabs here. So yeah, same here really. Javier says, what's your favourite building in London? Easy, no? Yeah, I think St. Paul's is, well, I have two, St. Paul's and the Tower of London. I think the Tower more for just all the history that it has and just the fact that it's been there for so long. But St. Paul's because it's one of those buildings, you know, you can come from lots of different angles and you feel really privileged. You know, when you can see a building like this, you think, wow, I feel so lucky, you know, to live here and to actually be able to walk about and see this spectacular building. So definitely, Chris, Murdoch is not helping the species. Definitely not. Oh, thank you. I live in London. This tour is thrilling. Thank you very, very much. Fantastic. Oh, there's one. Have we got time for one more? So Clara asks, where can you see the River Fleet? So the River Fleet does still exist. You can actually go to where the River Fleet begins. In North London, if you go to Highgate, Hampstead Heath, they have quite a few areas. Kenwood House in Hampstead Heath. It's a beautiful park and well worth doing as well. But you can, that's where you can see it. I think those are the best areas for seeing it as well. I don't think that here there are really many. Also, hello to Eric Van Dyke, who's enjoying the tour. So hello, Eric. Thank you very much for joining. And I think that's all the questions. Fantastic. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you as well for watching. Awesome. Fantastic. Oh, Jackie says, great women, meaning me and you, Jericho. Fab. Thank you so much. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. It's been a real pleasure. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said at the beginning, if you haven't done so already, the link is there in the description to take you straight to my donation page as well. Anything that you can give, I really appreciate it as well. €1, £1, you know, it really doesn't matter. It just really helps us, you know, to continue with the project, and it means that we're able to bring you some more of these great videos as well, in English, in Spanish as well. If you're kind of wanting to do a tour in Spanish, don't worry, we've got loads of stuff coming up. So that is all from me this evening, guys. If I don't see you before, I wish you a very, very Merry Christmas. I hope you stay safe and positive, and a Happy New Year as well. So goodbye from me and London. Bye guys, thank you very much.